Okay, so continuing on with multi-step equations, the harder types of equations you'll see in algebra, I wanted to do a couple more examples here. In previous videos, I showed you a recipe that you want to go through. Um, I also gave you in another video when you have equations or have variables on both sides, I said before you go through that recipe, you want to get the variables together on one side and then start from there. So notice here with this first equation, we've got negative 6x is equal to x plus 4. Again, they're separated by the equal sign, which means we've got x's here that we want to get together. We want to combine them. So before you do anything else, what you have to do is get the x's together. Also remember in a previous video, I showed you some examples. These examples here. Remember I did that first example with you and I said it doesn't matter whether you subtracted 6x from both sides or you added 8x to both sides. In this particular case, I'm going to tell you you can still do that. You could still move this 6x over here if you wanted to, but just remember that when you do that, you're going to be left with 0 over here, and it's going to be one of those few times when you're solving equations where you'll actually have to write the 0, because that's all that's going to be left over there is nothing. So if you went ahead and did that, you could add 6x to both sides if you like keeping things positive. In this case, what you've gotten is negative 6x plus 6x, and in previous videos we just crossed that out and not write to 0, but there's nothing left to write on that side, so when there's nothing left on that side you would have to write it as 0. Also notice that when you do this you're adding an extra step. X plus 6 is 7x plus 4. So what you've just done is you've added an extra step. Now you've got to go ahead and subtract 4 from both sides and then divide both sides by 7. If you had went ahead and subtracted the x from both sides up here, you could have had this done in 2 steps instead of 3. But now what you've got is 7x plus 4. To get to the x, I have to get rid of the 4, so I would have to subtract 4 from both sides. And what I'm left with is 0 minus 4. Negative 4 is equal to 7x. So again, the x is the thing we're trying to get by itself, so that's the number beside of it that we have to divide both sides by. In this case, I have to divide both sides by 7, and I'm left with x is equal to negative 4 over 7. Okay? This is a totally legitimate answer. If the question tells you to leave it as a fraction, then you're done, because negative 4 over 7 is as simple as you could write that. If, by any chance, though, they want you to write it as a decimal, you'd have to go to your handy-dandy graphing calculator, type in 4 divided by 7, and you would get negative 0.57 is equal to x. So if they wanted you to write it as a decimal, that would be the decimal version. 2 different ways to write the same answer. Okay? Now just to show you that you can write that equation, that you can do that equation a little bit quicker if you go ahead and subtract x instead of the 6x. So negative 6x is equal to x plus 4, and I'm going to blow through this one here just to show you that it's going to give you the same answer. Over here, remember, we added 6x. If you want to subtract x, you can save yourself a step that we didn't have to do on this side. We had to do over there. So negative 6x minus x is going to be negative 7x, and that's equal to positive 4. Now notice, you're already at a point here where all you have to do is divide by negative 7 and you're done. Contrast that with doing it over here. You added that extra step. You created more work for yourself. So basically what I would suggest doing when you have a multi-step equation with variables on both sides like this, I would suggest if there's an x alone on one side, I would move the other x over to that. It's lonely. It wants a friend. Bring it a friend rather than move it to the x. That's just to save you some work. All right. If you solve this, then you're dividing both sides by negative 7. So again, x is going to be negative 4/7. All right. That's just to show you you can do it either way. Doing it this way here on the left adds an extra step, creates more work. and we're lazy, so we don't like to create more work for ourselves. So don't do that to yourself. All right. The equation on the right is an example of when we start throwing fractions into it. Now, in previous videos, I gave you this recipe and I said, try to get rid of any fractions that are going to create problems for you. In this case, though, to get rid of these fractions, you'd have to figure out a number that all three of these numbers would divide into. So thinking about that makes your head explode. Don't worry about it. In this case, we'll just deal with the equation with the fractions that we're given, and we'll live with it. So in this case, our goal is to get the variable by itself, but notice we have a variable on both sides of the equal sign. Here's the equal sign. I've got an A over here, and I've got an A here. So this is like this first example, except now you've got a fraction, so we have to move one fraction over with the other. And lessons learned from this first example, let's not create any more work for ourselves by moving this over here. Let's go ahead and move the 1/4 over with the 3/5. So the rules stay the same. Just because it's a fraction doesn't mean you change the rules or anything. In this case, we've got a positive 1/4. If I want to get rid of it, I will subtract 1/4 from both sides. So what I'm left with over here, 1/4 minus 1/4 is equal to 0. And then I'm left with 2/3. So negative 2/3 are on the left. So now this is why fractions are tricky. You've got a subtraction problem here, and you can't really subtract them until you get the bottoms the same. So basically then you have to change the bottoms on these fractions. Now we're going back into, I don't know, 5th, 6th grade math, where we're working with adding and subtracting fractions. What can I multiply 4 by and 5 by to get the same number? 4 and 5 are 20, so we can put this as fractions over 20. All right. So the goal here is going to be to transform this top fraction, 3/5, into something over 20. In order to do that, I had to multiply this by 4 to get 20. So what I've got to do is multiply the top by 4 as well. So 3 times 4 is 12. And we'll do the same thing down here. What did I have to multiply 4 by to get 20? Well, I had to multiply it by 5. So now I have to multiply the top by 5 as well. So negative 1 times 5 is going to be negative 5. And now you can get rid of these things. And you're left with 12 over 20a minus 5 over 20a. So remember, when the bottoms are the same, you subtract the top numbers, the numerators. 12 minus 5 is 7. So down here we're going to be left with 7 over 20a. All right. And this is where, if you're not good with your fractions, you're going to have to find another video or work with some other problems. Just see if you can improve your skills with fractions. The other thing I might suggest, and it's perfectly okay, is to turn these into decimals and do them in your calculator. If your teacher lets you use a calculator and do that, don't kill yourself with the fractions. All right. Notice we've got 7 over 20 times a. Now this is the first time in the videos that I've left you with a fraction times the variable. To undo a fraction, the rule is we're going to use the reciprocal. In order to get rid of this 7 over 20, I have to flip-flop them. So basically what happens here is I've got to multiply this 7 over 20 by 20 over 7. All right, and I know that looks a little weird to have that a right in the middle, but that's just how it works out. You can also put this over here so that they cancel out, however you want to write it. But the reason we do this is so that they cross reduce on those sides, and you're left with just a on that side. So the rule is, when you have a fraction times a variable, to get the variable by itself, you flip-flop the numbers and then multiply both sides by that number. Okay? Another way to think of it is you're going to take this number, throw him over the wall that we build right here on the equal sign. He lands on his head, and that's what you multiply both sides by. So now that we've got that, this will cancel this out, this will cancel this, and what we're left with is a is equal to And now we've got to do a multiplication. So 20 times negative 2 is negative 40. 3 times 7 is 21. Now, there's a bunch of different ways you can write that. I think that's the simplest form for the fraction. We can leave it that way. If you wanted to write it as a decimal, you plunk it into your calculator, and you get 40 divided by 21, which would also be 1.90. So there's two different ways to write that answer, but that's how you would handle fractions. If you have any questions, leave it in the comments. Thank you.